Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. What do you do when a brand new HOA neighborhood starts using your private ranch road like it's public, then gets mad when you say no? I tried polite, I tried locks, and then my fence got cut open like someone planned it, so I set a trail cam, and what it caught changed everything. I grew up on a cattle ranch in the rural part of our county. My grandfather bought the property back in the 1960s, and my father took it over in the late 80s. It's not a huge operation by Texas standards, about 800 acres, but it's been in our family for generations, and it's home. When I was growing up, the nearest neighbor was over 2 miles away, and we liked it that way. My father passed away unexpectedly when I was 31, heart attack while he was out checking fence line. Losing him that suddenly was devastating, but by that point I'd already been managing most of the day-to-day operations, so taking over fully was a natural transition, even if the circumstances were awful. One of the quirks of our property is that an old county road runs right through it. Back in the 1940s, before the highway system was really developed, this road was actually a main route between two towns, but when they built the new highway in the 60s, the old road fell into disuse. Eventually, the county officially abandoned it. After the county abandoned it years ago, it became part of our property. My grandfather had to do some legal paperwork to get it officially transferred, but it's been ours for decades. That old road connected to the main highway about 3 miles north of our main ranch entrance. For as long as I could remember, we occasionally let neighbors use it as a shortcut if they needed to. It was never official, just a neighborly courtesy. Someone's truck breaks down and they need to get to town quick? Sure. Cut through our land. It happened maybe 3 or 4 times a year, and it was never a problem. Then, about 4 years after I took over the ranch, everything changed. A developer bought a large parcel of land that bordered our property to the east. Within 6 months, they'd cleared the land and started building a residential development. Not just a few houses, mind you, but a planned community with about 200 homes, complete with an HOA, a community pool, tennis courts, and all the amenities that people who move out to the country apparently can't live without. The development was called Heritage Hills or something like that, one of those names that's supposed to sound exclusive and historic despite being brand new. The houses went up fast, and within a year the place was mostly sold out. That's when my problems started. The old abandoned road that cut through our property, it just happened to emerge onto the highway about half a mile from the main entrance to Heritage Hills. And the way the roads worked out, if someone from Heritage Hills wanted to get to our small town where all the shopping and services were, they had 2 options. They could take the official route, which meant driving out their main entrance, going about 4 miles down the highway, then taking another road into town. Or if they cut through our ranch via that old road, they could get to town in about half the time and distance. At first, it was just a few people. I'd occasionally see tire tracks on the old road, or notice that the old gate we kept across it had been opened and closed. The gate wasn't locked. It was just one of those basic wire gates meant to keep cattle from wandering, not to keep people out. I figured maybe a couple of the new residents had figured out the shortcut and were using it occasionally. I wasn't thrilled about it, but it also didn't seem like a huge problem. Then it became more frequent. The tire tracks multiplied. The old road, which had been mostly overgrown with grass since we never really used it, started to show signs of regular traffic. The grass was getting worn down, and I could see where people were driving. I decided to address it before it became a bigger issue. I looked up the Heritage Hills HOA contact information and sent them a polite letter. I explained that the old road was private property, that it ran through our ranch, and that while we appreciated having new neighbors, we couldn't have people regularly driving through our land. I mentioned liability concerns, the fact that we run cattle and people driving through could leave gates open or spook the animals, and I asked them to let their residents know that the road wasn't a public thoroughfare. I got a response about 2 weeks later. It was professionally written, but basically dismissed my concerns. The letter thanked me for reaching out, but explained that several Heritage Hills residents had been using the road and found it very convenient. They suggested that since the road appeared to be unused and we weren't apparently maintaining it, perhaps we could come to some kind of arrangement. They even offered to have their residents contribute to road maintenance costs in exchange for an easement. I wrote back and politely but firmly declined. I explained again that this was our property, that we had livestock operations that could be affected, and that we simply weren't interested in granting an easement. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. The traffic actually increased. What had been a few vehicles a week turned into a few vehicles a day. I started recognizing the same cars making regular trips. People had clearly decided that my refusal was unreasonable and they were going to use the road anyway. I decided to make the message clearer. I installed a proper gate at the southern entrance where the old road met our main property, near where it was accessible from Heritage Hills. Not just a wire gate, but an actual metal farm gate with a chain and lock. I also put up several clearly visible signs that said, "Private property, no trespassing." For about 2 weeks, the traffic stopped. I thought the problem was solved. Then I noticed the gate was open. Not just unlocked, but standing wide open. I drove down to check it and found that someone had cut through the chain with bolt cutters. They hadn't even bothered to hide what they'd done. The cut chain was just lying on the ground. I replaced the chain with a heavier one. 3 days later, it was cut again. This happened 4 more times over the next month. Each time, I'd replace the chain, and within a few days, someone would cut it. The 5th time it happened, I'd had enough. I installed a much heavier chain, the kind that would require serious equipment to cut through, and I also added a steel cable as a backup. I figured if someone was determined enough to get through both, at least it would slow them down and maybe make them reconsider. That lasted almost a week before both the chain and cable were cut. At this point, I was furious. This wasn't just about convenience anymore. Someone was actively vandalizing our property, and I suspected it was being coordinated somehow because it was happening too regularly to be random. I sent another letter to the HOA, this one much less polite. I detailed every instance of the cut locks and made it clear that this was criminal trespass and vandalism. I informed them that if it happened again, I'd be contacting law enforcement and pursuing charges against anyone I could identify. The HOA's response was infuriating. They claimed they had no control over individual residents' actions, that they couldn't be held responsible for what people did outside the development, and that if I was so concerned about security, perhaps I should invest in better fencing and gates. The tone was dismissive and almost mocking. 2 days after receiving that letter, I was driving out to check on our cattle in the eastern pasture, the one that bordered Heritage Hills. That's when I discovered something that made me see red. Someone had cut a section of our fence, not just damaged it accidentally, but deliberately cut it, removing about 20 feet of wire and pulling out several posts. The cut section happened to be right where our land bordered the development, and it created a direct path from the development to the old road. Instead of having to drive around to the official entrance of the old road near our southern property line, people could now just drive straight through the gap in the fence onto the road, saving them even more time. This was beyond simple trespassing. This was destruction of property, and it put our livestock at risk. If cattle wandered through that gap, they could end up on development roads where they could be hit by cars or cause accidents. I fixed the fence that same day using T-posts and heavy gauge wire. Then I started making calls. First, I called the sheriff's office and filed a formal report. A deputy came out, took photos of the damaged fence and the cut chains from the gate, and wrote up a report. He told me he'd increase patrols in the area, but he was honest about the limitations. Without catching someone in the act or having video evidence, there wasn't much they could do. That conversation gave me an idea. I fixed the fence again a week later when I found it had been cut in the same spot, and this time I didn't just repair it, I fixed it and set up a trail camera pointed at the fence line. These cameras are motion activated and used by hunters to monitor game, but they work just as well for catching trespassers. It took less than 4 days. I checked the camera on a Thursday morning and found exactly what I needed. The footage showed a woman pulling up to the fence in a white Mercedes SUV. She got out with wire cutters and methodically cut through the fence line, pulling back the wire to create a gap wide enough to drive through. The camera got clear shots of her face, her license plate, and the whole process. I took the SD card from the camera and went straight to the sheriff's office. The deputy who'd taken my initial report reviewed the footage and immediately recognized the woman. Turns out she was on the Heritage Hills HOA board. Her name was Patricia something or other, and she lived in one of the larger homes in the development. The deputy went to have a conversation with her that same afternoon. When he called me back, he said she understood the seriousness of the situation and that he didn't expect any more problems from her. He asked if I wanted to press charges. I told him I'd hold off for now, but would absolutely pursue it if there were any more incidents. I thought that would finally be the end of it. For a little while it was. The fence stayed intact and I didn't see evidence of people cutting through anymore. But the traffic on the old road itself didn't stop. People were still getting onto it somehow, and I realized they must be accessing it from the northern end where it met the highway. That gate was even older and more basic than the southern one had been. About 3 weeks after the fence cutting incident, I got a letter. Not from the HOA this time, but from a law firm representing the HOA. The letter was 3 pages of legal language that boiled down to a threat. It claimed that by allowing Heritage Hills residents to use the road for an extended period, I had created an implied easement. It argued that the residents had come to rely on this access and that closing it now was unreasonable. It demanded that I restore access to the road and warned that if I didn't, they would pursue legal action. I called my attorney, a guy who'd handled my father's estate and various ranch business over the years. I explained the situation and read him the letter. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and then he said something like, "Well, that's one of the more creative legal theories I've heard this month." He told me not to worry about it, he'd draft a response. A week later, he sent me a copy of what he'd sent them. His response laid out the complete legal history of the property and made it crystal clear that they had no claim to the road whatsoever. He also warned them that if they filed a lawsuit anyway, it could backfire on them badly. I figured that would be enough to make them back down. Instead, it seemed to make them more aggressive. I started getting calls at all hours from Heritage Hills residents. Some were angry, yelling about how I was being unreasonable and making their lives difficult. Others tried to be conciliatory, offering to pay me for access or suggesting we work out some kind of formal agreement. What I learned from these calls was interesting. Apparently the HOA had never told the general membership about the fence cutting or the threatening letters they'd sent. The board had acted on their own, and now that word was getting around about what they'd done, a lot of homeowners were upset with their own HOA. But whether people were angry at me or at their HOA board, the calls were getting to be too much. I stopped answering my phone unless I recognized the number. Then, about 2 months after the fence cutting incident, it happened again. Different spot on the fence, same deliberate cutting, and my trail camera, which I'd moved to a new location, caught it again. Same woman, Patricia from the HOA board, apparently deciding that enough time had passed that she could try again. This time I didn't hesitate. I called the deputy and told him I wanted to press charges. He went and arrested her that afternoon. She was charged with criminal mischief and trespassing. From what I heard later, she ended up with a criminal record and had to do community service and pay restitution. But here's where it gets interesting. That arrest became a big deal in Heritage Hills. Apparently, a lot of the residents hadn't known that a board member was the one cutting my fence. When it came out that Patricia had been acting on her own, repeatedly committing crimes to try to maintain access to my property, there was a revolt. An emergency HOA meeting was called, Patricia was removed from the board, and from what I heard from a few people, several other board members were recalled as well. You'd think that would finally be the end of it. But the new HOA board, trying to distance themselves from the previous board's actions, sent me yet another letter. This one was more apologetic in tone, but still requested that I consider allowing access to the road, promising better behavior and offering compensation. I was done being nice. I was done with polite letters and reasonable requests that, when ignored, I'd ask them nicely to stay off my property. I'd explained repeatedly that this was private land. I'd been patient even as they vandalized gates and cut fences, and what had that gotten me? Threats, harassment, and criminal damage to my property. So I decided to permanently solve the problem. I called a fence company that next week and got a quote for a heavy-duty gate at the northern entrance of the old road, where it met the highway. Not a simple farm gate, but a serious barrier. 16 feet wide, made of welded pipe with a chain and lock system that would require power tools to defeat. The kind of gate that makes a statement. The fence company installed it on a Friday. By Saturday morning, the first Heritage Hills resident showed up at the gate, found it locked, and had to turn around. Over the weekend, I counted at least 30 different vehicles that came to the gate, stopped, and then had to turn around and take the long way. Some people just turned around quietly. Others sat there for a while, presumably hoping someone would show up to open the gate. One person actually called me, though I have no idea how they got my number, and demanded I come open the gate immediately. I politely told them it was private property and they needed to use public roads. The calls and complaints started up again, but this time I was ready. Any call that came from a Heritage Hills resident got the same response. This is private property. You need to use public roads. If you continue to harass me, I'll consider it a legal matter. The HOA sent another letter, this one threatening legal action again, My attorney sent back an even more detailed response explaining exactly why they had no legal ground to stand on and warning them about harassment. But here's the thing about closing that gate. It didn't just inconvenience Heritage Hills residents. It also made the entire development less attractive. The shortcut had become one of the selling points for the neighborhood, even if it was never officially promised. Apparently, the whole situation had caused a significant problem for the development. Someone who'd recently bought a house there told me that when people had been buying their homes, some real estate agents had apparently mentioned the shortcut as a selling point, though he said they were careful not to make any actual promises. Now buyers felt misled about how convenient the location really was. Some residents started looking to sell. The HOA was dealing with internal conflicts between people who blamed the previous board and people who thought I was the villain. He mentioned that property values in the development had reportedly taken a hit because of the reduced convenience. At least that's what angry homeowners were claiming at HOA meetings. For my part, I felt pretty satisfied with how it turned out. I'd tried the neighborly approach, I'd tried the legal approach, I'd tried patience and clear communication. What had worked in the end was the simplest solution, a locked gate on my private property that should have been there from the start. The old road is still there, cutting through our ranch just like it has for decades. But now it's used exactly as it should be, as part of our private property for our own use. We use it occasionally when we need to move equipment or check on cattle in the back pastures. It's peaceful again, just like it was before Heritage Hills was built. I still live on the ranch. I still run cattle on the same land my grandfather bought 60 years ago. And I still have that locked gate at the northern entrance of the old road. The chain has never been cut again, probably because the kind of equipment you'd need to cut through it would be pretty conspicuous on a public highway. Every now and then I'll see a car slow down as it approaches the gate, like the driver is hoping maybe this time it'll be open. It never is. They always have to keep driving and take the long way around, just like they should have been doing all along. I heard from a few people that several families moved out of Heritage Hills after all this happened. The HOA went through a full board overhaul. Patricia, the woman who cut my fence twice, moved away entirely after her arrest. The development is still there, of course. Most of the houses are still occupied, but the shine has definitely worn off. As for me, I reinforced several sections of fence line, added more trail cameras, and made it clear through every available channel that our ranch is private property. No exceptions, no negotiations, no easements. The old road is still there, cutting through our ranch the same way it has for decades. But now it is used exactly the way it should be, by us. We use it when we need to move equipment, check cattle, or reach the back pastures. Every now and then I still see a car slow down when it approaches the northern gate. The driver pauses for a second like maybe this time it will be open. It never is. They turn around and take the long way, just like they should have been doing all along. I tried being neighborly, I tried polite letters, I tried patience. I even held off pressing charges the first time Patricia was caught cutting my fence. What did that get me? Cut chains, vandalized fences, legal threats, angry calls. People acting like a shortcut through my cattle ranch was something they were owed because it saved them a few minutes. That is not neighborliness. Neighborliness is asking first, respecting the answer, treating someone else's land like it matters because it does. Heritage Hills did not want to be neighbors. They wanted free access, so now they have exactly what their behavior earned them. Nothing. No access, no shortcut, no convenience. Just the public roads they should have been using from the beginning. The gate is still there, the lock is still in place, and the old road is still private property, just as it has always been. The next one is an entitled people story. I am 31 and my sister is 38. Our relationship has been difficult for as long as I can remember. Even when we were growing up, she constantly caused problems. There were illegal downloads, drunk driving incidents, and times when she disappeared for days during her teenage years. When she was 16, she moved in with our grandparents because my mother had moved about 250 kilometers away after starting a new relationship. From that point on, my grandparents protected her from consequences in every possible way. They are now 88 and 82 years old. Their health is clearly declining and they still live alone 250 kilometers away from us. Later, my sister was in a long-term relationship with an extremely controlling and disturbed partner. He secretly recorded her and sent the videos to family members. She was forced to constantly prove where she was by sending photos. At one point, a tracking device was even found in the trunk of her car. The situation became so bad that about 6 years ago, she decided to move closer to us. For both of her major moves, we drove roughly 250 kilometers each time just to help her. Despite that effort, her behavior toward us was deeply disrespectful. On my birthday, my mother, who had a broken leg at the time, and I drove those 250 kilometers again to help with her move, only to end up waiting 4 hours outside her door before she even let us in. 2 years earlier, during another move, she left me, my grandparents, my mother, and my best friend to handle the entire move without her. At the beginning of the day, she said she was briefly going to meet her boyfriend. Then she disappeared for hours while we kept lifting, carrying, and completing the move for her. She is now engaged. Her fiancé is honestly a deadbeat. He has no ambition, has been unemployed for months, and is lazy. At least he is not controlling, and among her very few options, he is probably one of the better people around her. Still, he contributes nothing to stabilizing their situation. My sister has never been able to keep a job long term. A dog she received from our father 9 years ago has effectively been living with our grandparents for the last 4 years. Despite that, she adopted another dog from a kill shelter, even though the two dogs do not get along and she has no way of properly housing the second one. I cannot take the dog because of my landlord, and my mother's current partner refuses because he strongly dislikes my sister. My mother has been with her current partner for 3 years. He can be somewhat self-centered, but overall he is decent. Over those 3 years, there have been around 20 invitations for family dinners or gatherings. My sister skipped at least 12 of them, often without canceling or by canceling at the last minute. Because of that, he cannot stand her anymore either. 2 years ago, my sister became unemployed. She was laid off while moving into a house with her fiancé. The rent for that house is 600 euros per month. She went on sick leave because of depression and received benefits for 1 year. She has now been unemployed for about 19 months. She says full-time work is too much, part-time work does not pay enough, and moving is not an option, even though she clearly cannot afford her housing. In November 2024, our father suddenly passed away and left behind a financial disaster. He had lost roughly €250,000 in derivatives and had accumulated about 80,000 euros in debt. At the same time, there were 2 houses, a widow who barely speaks the language despite living here for over 50 years, and an ongoing legal case worth about 200,000 euros in our favor. The inheritance had to be accepted in full or rejected entirely, including all debts. One of the houses was occupied by tenants who had stopped paying rent. They had let animals urinate on the floors and had not ventilated the place properly. Meanwhile, the banks demanded their money. I worked full-time and put almost my entire income into repaying the debt. I handled everything: notaries, banks, local authorities, unpaid bills, and emotional support for my completely overwhelmed stepmother. My sister was mostly at home and depressed. At times, she ignored me for days when important appointments were scheduled. My partner had to take time off work to support me when my sister did not show up. I drove my sister about 250 kilometers roughly 15 times for bank appointments and visits related to the inheritance, and I never asked her for gas money. My mother, who earns very little herself, lent her 4,000 euros. My grandparents are paying her rent. I lent her 700 euros, even though I was barely getting by and had already paid around 8,000 euros toward my father's debts. She now only receives unemployment benefits, which are not enough. Her fiancé has been unemployed for 10 months and barely looks for work because his benefits last 12 months. If he does not find a job, they will end up on welfare. Their home is far too large to be covered by assistance. Working does not seem to be an option for her, and moving is something she refuses to consider. The current trigger might sound small, but it broke something in me. My mother invited both of us to spend the second Christmas day with her partner and his family. My sister first responded vaguely, then canceled shortly before the event. Her reason was self-care. She was upset because she had not been included when my mother visited our grandparents on Christmas Eve. Whenever I bring up problems, she frames herself as the victim. She is nearly 40, yet she avoids responsibility and ignores anything uncomfortable. I feel completely drained. I've been carrying her emotionally and practically for years, and this post is honestly just the tip of the iceberg. Even my stepmother can no longer tolerate her behavior. She wants to split the inheritance mainly with me and give my sister only her mandatory 25% share because of how she has acted throughout this entire process. I am at the point where I am seriously considering saying, I cannot do this anymore. I do not want this relationship in my life. The next one is an entitled parent story. Hi, I am a 20-year-old woman, and recently I have started realizing that my parents and their parenting style are actually very strange. I think I have vaguely known this for a while, but it did not really come to a head until this year, after I turned 20. It first started clicking into place when I was on an audio chat app making some friends. The topic of weird parent behavior came up and everyone was sharing stories. I was mostly just listening while doodling in my sketchbook. Then they asked me if my parents had ever done anything odd. Honestly, the first thing that came to mind was that, starting when I was 10 years old, my parents removed all the locks from all the bedroom doors and replaced the handles with ones that could not be locked. They did this to every bedroom in the house except their own. I spent the second half of my childhood sometimes getting walked in on while changing because they did not knock before entering. Until I was about 16, they also required me to never fully shut my bedroom door. It always had to be open at least a full hand's width, sometimes halfway open. If I had a friend over, the door had to be completely propped open. I did not have many friends at that point, but still, I grew up with a very unusual lack of privacy. There were even times when they would find my door shut and tell me that if I did not keep it open, they would take it off its hinges. I also talked about how, from a very young age, probably around 3 or 4, they required me to dress modestly. I always had to wear a shirt over one-piece swimsuits. I was never allowed to wear tank tops or shorts that did not reach my knees. I was not allowed to wear makeup unless I was performing in something, and even then that did not really change until I was around 12 to 14. Anything cosmetic was discouraged so strongly that I refused to pierce my ears because I saw it as poking holes in my body, which I had been taught was a temple. As I told my new online friends this, I noticed they were not laughing or joking about it with me. They had gone oddly quiet. When I innocently asked what was wrong, they immediately started saying things like, "That is so wrong," and "You need to get out." Then I shared something that apparently shocked them even more. I told them I did not actually have access to my own money. Even though I have a bank account, I do not know the password to log in online, and my father manages all of my finances. This was even true when I was working as a Freedom Care caregiver for my late grandmother during the winter and spring before she died. I had been pressured by family into doing it as a way to help my mom with my Nana. I got the pay stubs in the mail, but my dad had me set everything up as direct deposit into the account that I still do not have the password for. So even if I wanted to move out, I could not do it without raising red flags for my dad. His name is still on that account because it has been my only account since childhood, and at the time, I needed a parent or guardian to set it up. Any withdrawal would send him a notification. After I turned 20 and no longer had a job because my grandmother had passed away, I did not want to continue with Freedom Care because it was too painful. That was when my dad started requiring me to pay rent every month. To be fair, the rent amount was generously low, but there were conditions attached to our spoken agreement. He appointed me as the nanny for my 5 siblings and also as the housekeeper, as a way to make up for not paying as much as my adult brothers, who have jobs. I only have to pay $50 compared to their $200, but if I do not keep up with maintaining the house, public laundry, bathroom cleaning, and deep cleaning the kitchen every week, he adds $10 to $20 per lazy week, depending on how bad he thinks it was. So if I start at $50 but crash into depression and forget to clean every week for a month, I could easily end up paying the same as my brothers. Keep in mind, he is the only one who has access to my account. All I get are the bank transfer statements in the mail during the first week of every month, showing transfers from my life savings account to his. The amount can be anywhere from $50 to $190, depending on how neglectful he thinks I have been. This neglect also applies to whether I am policing my siblings and keeping their spaces clean, especially my baby brother. If his room is a mess because I was not constantly babysitting him while he cleaned it, that counts against me and adds more to my rent. The same applies to any chores my dad feels were not done often or thoroughly enough. After I explained this arrangement to my new friends, they somehow became even more concerned, which confused me. At the time, I still thought this was just quirky parenting stuff my family did. Later this year, though, my trust was shattered. My father got me a new phone and helped me set up a new Google account for it because it was an iPhone. At first, I thought this was kind of him, then he ruined it. A few weeks later, I was doing normal young adult things. I had a dating app on my phone and was talking to a guy about possibly meeting up. One night, I went to sleep happy because I had found someone genuinely interesting. He liked my date ideas and was willing to meet up without anything explicitly sexual being treated as a requirement. The next morning, I woke up and found that my phone was gone. My father said he took it because he refused to allow me to engage in hookup culture while under his roof. I was confused because, as far as I knew, the guy I was flirting with was not being explicitly sexual. Yes, there was some playful banter, but nothing inappropriate was involved in the plans we were making. My dad then went on a rant about how this was just like when I was 18 and how guys are only on those apps for one reason. To be fair, when I turned 18, I had regrettably snuck out to meet a guy. But in my defense, I was trying to finally explore normal adult sexuality, something that had basically been gatekept from me my entire life. When I was confronted about it, I stopped and decided to wait until I was older to try dating again. I thought 20 would be a more appropriate age to start putting myself out there. Apparently, I was wrong. He kept my phone for 3 months straight after that. It was especially difficult because I got a church job working with children, and I did not have the app I needed for attendance or the lesson manuals I was supposed to reference. When I finally got my phone back recently, he had installed a special app that tracks everything from my social media usage to my actual text messages and conversations. I cannot even download apps because the tracking app has a feature that allows him to turn off that ability. It is basically an app made for parents to control children with. My father said I could have my phone back only if I never broke his rules again and agreed never to remove the app from my phone. So now I am here, awake in the middle of the night, wondering if all of this is my fault. Maybe this is just my dad's way of trying to protect me from the cruelty of the world. But at the same time, when I look back at all these things and remember other strange behavior from both my father and my mother, and when I think about what other people have said, I am starting to wonder if something is genuinely wrong here. Any thoughts or advice would be greatly appreciated. Update, May 10th. Happy Mother's Day. Thank you everyone for your advice, wake-up calls, and warnings. I am actually making progress. I managed to convince my mom to be on my side at least a little. She convinced my dad to remove the invasive tracking app, which apparently has a history of acting like Trojan malware. They are also not interrogating me every time I leave the house as much anymore, which has allowed me to go to the public library and talk to people who help young adults and eligible teens start their careers and find jobs. The Relief Society and other women from my ward have also been helping me through their connections to different shop owners and employees in the historical part of town. I even found a job listing for the main museum and historic hotel in my town. I am also working on a plan to move out. A lot of it depends on the confusing and difficult part of actually getting accepted for a real job, but I have hope that it will happen soon. Money was a big concern many of you brought up as well. I have a plan for getting a new bank account and making sure my dad cannot access or control it. I have been researching and reviewing the key steps I need to take. My goal is to save enough for a down payment and at least 4 months of rent, more if possible. I know health problems and other unexpected things can happen, like car crashes, breakdowns, injuries, or emotional crashes. Having at least that much saved would make me feel much more secure in my eventual independence. I would appreciate any other insights or advice. Thank you so much. Anyway, thank you for watching.